On today's episode of the Harrison Vapnek podcast, we're bringing on from the Ringer, Kyle Mann, to talk all things NBA from the first half of this season, talk about some of the biggest storylines from the first half, talk about the rookies, which guys have played really well, which guys have not really lived up to the expectations, talk some trades, what teams need to make a trade, what teams need to get over the hump, also some talk about Zion Williamson, talk about LeBron James, stuff like that. So stay tuned also about the first 3.5 minutes. You're going to see just our faces. We'll get the split screen on the YouTube version at the 3.5 minute mark. So stay tuned for that. And so sit back and relax. It's a good podcast with Kyle Mann starting right now. Now welcome on from the Ringer, founder of The Dime Drop, now Hoops Video for the Ringer on YouTube, Ringer NBA University, occasionally on the Ringer NBA show. Kyle Mann from the Ringer. Welcome on.
How's it going, man?
So a lot of talk about NBA, one of the best NBA Twitter followers, a lot of NBA analysis you can find on the Ringer on YouTube. Let's start with storylines for the first half of the season. It's been a pretty wild start since December. If I would have told you back when the season started at the end of December, the storylines from right now, what would surprise you the most?
What would surprise me the most? The Nets, their surge to the top has been really interesting. I would say, the rookie class has been a big thing too. You know, the rookies have been a little better than I think we thought they would be. Overall, top to bottom, really strong. I mean, the Knicks have been a nice surprise, fun surprise. What about you? What do you think?
I was going to bring up the rookies in a second, but yeah, the Knicks in my lifetime, there have been probably, I think, 2 Knicks teams that have finished maybe, I guess in the last decade, there's been one Knicks team that's really made the playoffs since 2013. There was a 2012 team that was the Jeremy Lin team. But the New York Knicks are a pretty big one. I would specifically the inside of the East. We talk about Philadelphia, Brooklyn, and Milwaukee, who are all 3 incredibly good teams. Then we go from Boston basically to Atlanta, all separated by 3 games. What are your thoughts on that kind of class in that middle?
Well, we've had for a variety of reasons. I guess we've had teams come out a little slower than expected. I kind of thought that Atlanta had built a nice competitive team, but they've been kind of plagued by injuries, and then obviously, some of the warring that's gone on within their team, and then within the staff. Having a staff shakeup. The Bucks have receded a little bit. Miami's kind of been slow to get going. I guess some of the things that we've been looking at as the season's rebooted has been the effect of the bubble. How much of that was real? How much of it was fool's gold? I think we have seen some guys sort of regress to the mean a little bit. I don't know if that's not really true of the Jazz. I think they've kind of improved on what they did in the bubble, but there's been more shift in the East than I think we thought. Also, you got to mention Philly. It was interesting to see. I, on paper, thought that they had won that trade with Curry for Richardson, and it turns out they really won it. Because Richardson's been really tough. But and then the Celtics too, in general. Just kind of going team by team there. The Celtics have struggled more than I expected that they would. So that's been another thing.
Especially having 2 considered all-star starters, so not all-star roster players. Something you mentioned a little earlier, I want you to elaborate on. You mentioned the effects of the bubble, kind of players coming out of it, not really the same player they were maybe even before, during. Who are some of those players you kind of referencing?
Well, Jamal Murray obviously went wild in the bubble. It's hard to say, it's hard to say why that would be. I have my theories. I mean, guys that are more rhythm, what I call lather scorers, guys who kind of get into these big bunches of hot streaks. Streakiness is kind of what I'm describing. And Murray's one of the streakiest players. When he gets going, I mean, he could score with anybody. And in the bubble, shooting at the same backdrop consistently, which they don't always get to do in a smaller gym. He really got going, and that might have really skewed his numbers a little bit. And I think there are a lot of sort of maybe less quantifiable variables kind of going on with the bubble too, in terms of players, their prep and how focused they were, because it was, in just the life sense from what we've heard people describe it, the players don't want to go back to the bubble. That's how much they just did, which is looking like they wouldn't have to now. But Murray is one of those guys who had a really incredible bubble. I think the Heat roster in general is another sort of bubble thing that we have. The Heat and the Nuggets both were two teams that have been a little tricky to dial in what their I don't know if I got unstable there for a second. It's in my internet lagged. Those are two main ones I think that we've had to sort of parse and figure out just how much of that was real and how much of that was not.
Yeah, well, the Heat had a really not a strong start to the season. I think they started 7-14. Now they've won 7 of the last 10, 18-18 at the All-Star break after making the finals last year. You mentioned the rookies early on. I know you did a lot of prep for the NBA draft. You came out with a video about Tyrese Halliburton about an hour before recording this. So Halliburton and other rookies that have really jumped out at you in the first half of this season.
The ones that have jumped out to me, you always kind of run the risk of patting yourself on the back because you go looking for the people that you rated highly and you'd be like, well, look how smart I was. And then, and then ignore the things. The guys that I expected to be good and have been good, Tyrese Halliburton, like you said, I expected Desmond Bain to be loved, Xavier Tillman. Well, yeah, let's talk about my hits. I'll see that. I did expect Tillman to be good. I expected Bain to be good, and they have been good. Another one, Jaden McDaniels. I pulled him out in our preview as somebody that I thought could be good, but he's been a monster defensively. He's still erratic in some other ways. Emmanuel Quickly was a guy that I saw a lot living in Kentucky, and he's actually superseded what I expected. He's been even better. I thought that he would be able to jump in and contribute here and there. Wiseman, I think, he's been another one that's been tricky to win. He's been very, very up and down with people because I think that once the book got written on him, teams are playing him a little bit differently, and he's going to have to adjust and expand and things like that. And he really benefited, I think, from some of the gravity in the Warriors offense. And Draymond is really, really good at throwing those quick lobs, and Wiseman was benefiting from some of that early on, I think. If you have a pulse and you can run and jump and dunk, you're going to get easy baskets with Draymond around. And then, Okongwu's coming back from an injury, trying to get his rhythm in that weird situation. And then Edwards is about what we expected, just really erratic. Is still learning, uber talented.
I think the dunk he has is living forever in everyone's minds.
Yeah, that was a nasty one. A lot of people wanted to focus on his some people wanted to argue about whether his box score mattered. He's a fun player, really talented. It's going to be, he has the talent to be like a special player. And I think it's going to be really fascinating, 5 years from now, 8 years from now, just looking back and saying, was it worth it to lean into that talent, or were there some signs there that maybe other guys would have been a better choice? But with his talent, I understand why they went with him.
Now, what about Melo Ball? He's right now the favorite to win Rookie of the Year. He has gotten Charlotte in the playoff race. They haven't made the playoffs in a few years with them. He's probably been the most talked about rookie in the last couple of years. What are your thoughts on him so far?
Yeah, he's up there. He's getting to the point where he's up there with, we've had some pretty good rookies here recently. Zion was pretty amazing. Morant was pretty amazing. And then Luka obviously was pretty amazing. But LaMelo was like the most obvious one I was that I omitted there. He's another one. I thought he would be good, but he's really adapted quickly to the NBA game, the speed of it. He hasn't had a moment where I thought he looked uncomfortable, but that's sort of just a function of the way he plays. He has just such a fluid speed that he can pick things up. The shooting has been up and down as expected. The turnovers have been up and down as expected, but he's the type of guy that's so talented that you kind of live with some of the waste. There's some players that are like that. Their ceiling for how much they produce is so high that you can kind of just say, we'll live with the turnovers. I think Borrego was resistant to that at first, but now he's, LaMelo's been going wild. I thought that he had the talent to be, he's the most talented player in the draft, in my opinion, and skill. But my kind of takeaway was I thought that he would be in that just sub all-star range, in like top 25 to 50, 60 player range. Really good starter. But now it's looking like, I mean, he could be really, really special. So
Charlotte has like shockingly become one of those fun teams in the league to watch this year. You got him. I know Devontae Graham has been hurt, but guys like Zeller, they have the Martin twins. It's pretty been a fun team to watch, even though they're a little outside the playoffs. What about some rookies that have kind of disappointed you that you expected more from in this first half of the season?
just outright disappointments. I mean, there hasn't been a lot of. I guess it
Maybe
just
just
depends
not
on what
lived
you
up to
think.
expectations. Yeah.
Yeah. I guess it just depends on what you. There have been guys that haven't played as well. I mean, like I was just talking with my buddies I do the Ringer University podcast with about Denny Avdija. He's been benched. Maybe not as ready as we thought that he would be, but we're kind of still dialing that in a little bit. Yeah, and then of course, just there's been sort of injuries too that have driven some disappointment. Killian Hayes, we didn't really get to see him play at all. You know, I didn't expect Pokusevski to play early on. I know some people have been knocking him, but that was always the expectation that he would struggle. Sadiq Bey's been a nice surprise, or he's been a nice. He's played well. Hasn't been a super big surprise, but I don't know. Who is it? Who's your team? Do you have a team that you root for?
Miami, Precious Achua. He's been, started pretty strong in the beginning of the year, and then he's kind of been in and out of the rotation. Miami's had a lot of injuries and stuff and COVID problems, but I'm expecting Precious to kind of move up closer as we get towards the end of the season. Somebody mentioned a little bit earlier Zion, because I know you've been pretty high on Zion since his Duke days. When we made a video for the Ringer about him, I think in his last couple of months at Duke.
Mm-hmm.
He's been awesome this season. He's scoring 25.6 points per game, a lot of rebounds, shooting at over 60% this season. How far can Zion go? What is his ceiling? It's only year two. He's going to play in the All-Star game on Sunday. How high can Zion go?
I mean, his ceiling is MVP. That's a ceiling, and that's always been his ceiling. And if you're in that tier of player that has that on your projectable outcomes, you're in the top tier of players, period. I mean, and that's very, very few. He's the type of guy who could offensively, we've seen it. I mean, how often, I made this point the other day on a podcast, how often do you get in a situation where you have a guy that weighs 280 pounds and he's 6'6", and we argue whether he's a center or a point guard? He's very close to a singular event in basketball. Just an abnormal, off the charts athlete. Measuring and testing higher than anybody that we've had, and then to be so skilled. And I think the big question for him is if he's going to ascend into that, stratosphere of MVP conversation. The defense is going to be a big part of that. And that's been sort of an up and down kind of thing. His effort has been wildly uneven. I think that athletically, people got so hung up on the, he's not as athletic as he was as Duke thing that we've stopped paying attention a little bit. He has rounded into form a little bit, I think. I mean, he did look stiff last year. There's no way around that. And I think that affected how much they could put him in space with the ball. But he's in better shape this year, I think, for sure. And he's shown the lateral explosiveness that we saw at Duke, and taking dudes off the dribble, getting to the rim, drawing fouls. I think I saw something. He's drawing 8.5 fouls, free throw attempts per game. MVP. Yeah, I think that's his ceiling.
How far do you think he is away from MVP? I know because there's so many great players right at the top right now. Embiid he's obviously not in the conversation this year, but how many years away do you think Zion is from getting in that discussion for the MVP?
There's a lot of things wrapped up in that, some fair, some unfair. I mean, one of the big things is narrative. I think that we attach, MVP has kind of become best player, best team, rightly or wrongly. I think we've had some guys who have contributed to. You also can contribute a lot to a non-winning situation, and we've seen that. I think what we've kind of agreed on is you need to be contributing to a situation that works. And for him to do that, there's the Pelicans part of this, them making tweaks around him to fix and optimize their roster, which I do think that they're going to need to make some serious decisions on that front here very soon. But then, like we said, the defense I think is really important. I thought that he had the potential to be a defensive player of the year type player. So he's going to have to really upgrade in that area, and then just become more versatile with his offense. I think that he could get to the point where he's a pretty capable, just catch and shoot. I'm open, shoot a three. I think most teams would prefer that. But it's possible within a couple of years it could happen. I mean, he could move into that conversation. LeBron's going to probably move out of that conversation, we assume,
eventually.
within two.
Eventually,
yeah, and then it'll start to kind of happen. But I mean, I think it's possible. It is possible. Yeah.
So something you brought up was the Pelicans. A lot of people thought they'd be a playoff team this year. They're 15-21, 4 games out of the 8 year, and I've been pretty disappointing. The roster construction is interesting because they brought in Stan Van, who was the coach for Detroit for the 4 years before he was with TNT. Detroit had 1 winning season when he was there. He had obviously the success in Miami and Orlando, but that was a different basketball age. They bring him in as the head coach this year. It's been really shaky. They have Lonzo Ball. They have Josh Hart, Brandon Ingram. It's kind of a weird roster. Jackson Hayes as well. What do you think the move for them is to build around Zion?
I kind of have this rudimentary kind of way that I look at rosters. Typically, I don't know that I can totally quantify it every single time out. But I mean, when I look at their roster, you look at a guy like Zion, I think you need to put a ton of shooting around him. I think whenever you have as much shooting as you can put on the floor, I think you have to do it. I mean, his template is similar to the Giannis template, to any kind of extreme downhill transition pressure. You always just kind of imagine there's this middle channel of the floor where he just creates alarm and chaos for opposing defenses. If there's, a missed shot, we're scrambling to get there to build the wall to keep him out of the lane. So the implied thing that you do next is you just put as much shooting as you can. Ingram is the type that I feel like could be flipped for assets, like legit good assets, to help him out. I never really thought that. I don't know that like Jackson Hayes is somebody that really works well with Zion. That's tough to put on the floor at the same time with him. Melly on paper, a player like Melly, somebody that I
stretch 5.
Exactly. Yeah. Somebody that I thought would be an interesting player to put next to him that I think defensively it would be a challenge, but I thought that they should try to get Vucevic. He's a guy that offensively it would be a blast. Now in the 1, 2, 3 spots, you'd have to really load up with guys who can, guard the ball, because you don't want a lot of downhill pressure coming at Zion. You want to keep him out of foul trouble as much as you can, and Vucevic too. But I mean, that's kind of what I was thinking. Redick is at the point where he depends on kind of dribble handoffs, off-screen type of stuff. He was never really a shot creator on his own, but especially at this point in his career, I don't know if they're going to want to hang on to him. I like Kyra Lewis a whole lot. It's a guy that I hope that they can find a way to get more minutes for him. But yeah, that's just kind of my general approach with how you build around Zion. Typically.
Yeah, they definitely have a lot of pieces on their roster. Also, Alexander Walker is a pretty good player. A lot of good young guys, even Lonzo's still 23 years old. Definitely is an unrestricted free agent, but a lot of potential with him. You mentioned Vucevic, and I'm going to bring up NBA trades now. Their trade deadline's coming up, I think, in about 2 weeks from this weekend, I believe. Give me some guys you expect to get moved, but I'm going to do it in the format that you made the video last year for the Ringer, the shot in the arm, over the hump moves for a championship team. So that shot in the arm of, how a team get better than the over the hump, how, they get over. Give me an example of each in a trade that you can see happen.
Oh, geez. Well, I mean, you would have to start thinking about the teams that are looking for a shot in the arm that are close. I mean, it seems like the Celtics could make a move. Every year it kind of feels like they could make a move and then they just don't.
It's a tradition.
Yeah, and then they just don't. If you're in the East, we're getting to the point where it's almost like a punt type situation. I guess their health factor in terms of the Nets, because man, the Nets at full strength, I just don't even know. There's a point with some deals where you pass this threshold of just transactions alone are not going to be powerful enough to combat. The Warriors got to that point. There's a point with player empowerment move where the players can pick to play together in ways that teams can't put them together, because it just isn't. No team would ever do that, So it's whatever have the power to put that kind of talent together, because they just wouldn't agree to it. So free agency starts to play a role in it. But well, let's just think about it in the East. I mean, I could see Miami making a deal. Do you think they could?
I think they have to. I don't think they can run it back and even win a playoff series with the team they have right now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, what do you think they need? I guess that would be kind of the way to package it.
It's, the ball handler, they have like Jimmy and Bam are the primary ball handlers, but if there was just like one kind of steady guy, they have the shooters, they have Robinson, I really hope they re-sign him this offseason. They have Hero, and Max Struss has been a quiet guy, but just like another big guy and just a consistent ball handler, I think they could use. But I just don't know who's out there that they can get that would really like put them over the hump.
Yeah, losing Dragic really was the nail in the coffin
Yeah,
for them. He was really kind of the fluidity for their offense whenever they weren't doing the handoff stuff and the off
exactly.
screen stuff. Yeah, he was really valuable. I could see that working. Yeah, I kind of thought that Philly maybe. I made a lot of Philly fans mad when I said this because they have that kind of regular season juggernaut thing where they have one element that's really difficult to stop. But once in the playoffs, it's just a different kind of thing. It's hard to game plan for Joel Embiid on a one night basis but if you play him several nights in a row, you can start to kind of figure it out. And some of these more flexible teams can do that. I thought that maybe they should try to make a move. I don't know what that would be at this point. Anytime you bring up trades or fit with them, their fans get pretty mad. So I've just kind of learned to avoid that with them. But I could see them getting one more like kind of shot creator type person. But that's just what the NBA is.
They lucked out with the Curry for Richardson. Curry's been pretty awesome for them. Richardson's been awful for Dallas.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, you would think that they would have seen that coming, but Dallas anyway. But yeah, I mean, I think we could go down through here and point to all these different teams that have shot creators and shooting, and it's what everybody needs. That I made this joke the other day that it's kind of like you offer somebody a piece of gum. Every NBA team is going to say, yeah, we want another shot creator. You could be like, hey, you need another big guy that can catch lobs. You're like, yeah, we're good on that. But shot creators and guys that can defend multiple positions, you never ever have enough of those. So I mean, in terms of the contenders, the Bucks, I don't think are going to be able to run. I mean, I'd be surprised. And teams that are just kind of close. Other than that, I don't know. Any come to mind for you? Shot or over the hump or shot in the arms?
In the East, I think Miami and Boston, because those two in the gap. Maybe Indiana, but I'm not sure what they. I don't think Indiana is with this team can win a playoff series. In the West, I really think Dallas is a couple moves away. I know like how good Luka is, but I really think getting something for Porzingis. Like if they got like a swap like Porzingis for Siakam, something like that. If Toronto's going to be selling hard with Lowry and Siakam, then I think Siakam could really help a team in the West who needs some defense. Like maybe Phoenix is like some guys off the bench. I think Phoenix is a hump guy away from going to the Western Conference Finals.
Yeah, I think you're right. Yeah, those are good. Those are good examples. I think Siakam definitely. Somebody mentioned Siakam in Denver the other day, and I like that too. That makes sense to me.
Him and Jokic would be scary.
Yes, they would. You put anybody that Jokic is just one of those players that like just expands what kind of personnel you can get so well that he's just fun to think about with just about any kind of combination. They were talking about Luka teaming up with somebody in the future, and in my mind, I started thinking about like, man, what if somehow Jokic and Luka got together? Because I know they like each other.
Yeah,
that would be fun.
Connection.
Yeah.
Some guys. So it feels like almost every year, second half of the season, there's someone who completely just jumps from what they did in the first half to the second half. Kind of we saw with Jason Tatum, kind of Donovan Mitchell a few years ago, Kawhi in 2014, Steph in 2013. Give me some candidates who could be the breakout guy in the second half of the season, who we wouldn't really see coming.
That we didn't see coming.
So not necessarily like an all-star, someone who kind of comes out of not nowhere, but really has a big jump in the second half of the season.
Well, let's see. I mean, we were talking a lot about guys that could kind of make the leap on our show. The nature of this discussion is kind of what we talk about on Ringer NBA University. Let's see. I have to just kind of go through. I'm always bad at this off the top of my head. Yeah, I mean, the Grizzlies are going to try to be, they're going to be getting everybody back. That's kind of a separate situation, though. They're going to be like rounding back into form. In terms of just getting into a situation, I mean, some guys just need to play more, and that kind of really helps them out. And the shakeup can kind of enable that to happen too. Well, off the top of my head, I can't think of anybody, to be honest. I'd have to think about that.
I was thinking Ja. Ja, when you mentioned Memphis, that was when the light bulb went off. Ja, I think he's gone he had all rookie of the year last year, awesome. But then really the bubble happened and he, wasn't outstanding. Yeah, the injury early on this season, then he's kind of quietly getting back into form. He's the breakout guy that I think he didn't make the All-Star team, of course. He's not really in the conversation for all NBA, despite playing at a high level when he does play. He had a good game last night against Memphis when we were recording this. I think that he's the guy that's going to have a huge, because I think he wants to make the playoffs. I think he thinks Memphis should have made the playoffs last year if there was no stoppage because they had a decent lead. Then they switched up the format where Portland was able to jump them in the being within 4 games in the bubble. I think, he's going to be kind of on a mission to get Memphis in the playoffs. What are your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, Ja is that kind of guy. I mean, he's obviously kind of getting back to where he was before. And Memphis is a team, yeah, I mentioned them, but like Jaren Jackson getting him back is going to be huge for them. Just they're always going to be dangerous because they have a bunch of guys that can defend and they have a bunch of shooters. And I think they're pretty well coached. It's just a smart organization. I liked basically everything they did in draft.
Yeah.
So. Yeah, they're a team that could do that. I mean, I guess Denver again. I mean, Michael Porter Jr. is always, it's always possible that he could make a leap and jump up and do something. I mean, RJ Barrett's been playing a little better lately. He's a guy that could. I've always been on the the RJ Barrett skeptic kind of side of things, and he's starting to kind of make me wonder if he's going to do something that I didn't expect. So he's been playing a little bit better. And then there are always rookies that are kind of always that are waiting in the wings there. There's a few guys like that for like Minnesota. Like we said, McDaniels, wouldn't be surprised. I'm really just going to be interested to see how Minnesota adjusts to this new coaching approach that they're going to have with Chris Finch. So there's a world of possibilities that can be unlocked there. So.
Yeah. So a little about you. You did a series, I think, a couple months ago, all of the right moves, talking about the origins and backgrounds, the most famous shots and movements in NBA history, MJ's fadeaway, Kareem's skyhook, Hardaway's crossover. Talk about how you got the idea for that series, because I think a lot of people really like that. And then what was like researching that?
I mean, yeah, you did your homework. I'm impressed. I think the original thing for that was actually Bill Simmons. That was the first thing he ever suggested I do.
It's a good suggestion.
Yeah, he emailed. I mean, because that's up his alley. He and I have that in common. I think I like a real specific interest in basketball history, which I'm probably more interested in basketball history than the average person. But that was why. And COVID had just hit, and we didn't have any current things going on. So I just kind of went through. The funny thing about that series was I went into it expecting it to be one thing, and then it was something else. Like, you can't just look at one player's move, because whenever I would look at their move, I would be like, well, where did that come from? And then you start pulling on this thread, and it was fun to see where it went. And when I got finished with that series, this sort of map was unfolding in front of me that I didn't realize until we were at the end, where I was just like, oh my God, like if you start looking at the history of dribble movement, and the history of shooting movement, and the history of, let's see, we did the skyhook, and then the finger roll, you start looking at like finishing moves and things like that. And it kind of just gives you this history of the way the game is played that is really interesting to watch now. So that was the most fun. And I just enjoy. The research was just really fun on that.
Which was your favorite one? Which was your favorite one to do?
I really enjoyed the crossover a lot. The history of the crossover. You could make a documentary about that. I mean, it's just fascinating. And then, which would be fun if I had the time and the money to do that. If somebody paid me to do that. You hear this? I'll do it. And Kareem was really fun. I enjoyed that and gained a lot of respect for him. Because something I point out in the video is just that the shot is a weird emblem of who he is, in a way that he has this sort of protected way that he lived his life and maintained that his whole way, and was super successful. I don't think you have many examples of that. It's just a really interesting story to me. I find Kareem really interesting. But it's inevitable. Anytime you do anything about Kareem, he's not like a click. He's not like a money, like a
no.
Despite
being the leading scorer in NBA history.
Leading scorer in NBA history, and he played 4 years of college. So if you can imagine what he would have done if he had come out like he would now.
And no 3-point line as well.
Yep, really fascinating.
And with the crossover documentary, I think you could reach out to Bill. I think he has a little bit of a background with documentaries. Maybe he can give you a leg on that. One more thing about you. You did Dime Drop for how many years? When did you start that?
I started that in 2018, around
so
the 20.
worked on that for a couple of years, moved over to the Ringer. Tell about the jump from previously at Dime Drop and then making the transition to the Ringer, and kind of how your digital journalism career changed from there.
Yeah, I actually came into this unexpectedly. That's what I always tell people. I was looking for a new job, and in my spare time, I was like, I've always been a basketball obsessive, and I just started writing about it. I'd never really written about it. I always thought about it when I was younger, but just kind of never did it. I always just kind of thought I had other kind of career paths I would look at. And in my spare time, I just started doing it for nobody, and I made a little site. It was like a WordPress was the first, it's still out there. All my bad takes are on there if you want to go find them. And then, yeah, I think I had the idea, hey, like, because I'm not a video editor. I've always been more of an audio guy. And I was like, hey, I should put the article to video. So I just tried it. And I made it about, I knew a lot about like that class. So I was like, I'll choose one. It snowballed, man. I mean, it happened really quickly. And I think the big thing, and I always tell this, whenever I have college kids that are kind of looking to do this kind of thing, come talk to me. I always just encourage them to not ask for permission, like to just go do stuff, because the more you wait for permission, the more frustrated I found that you can feel. So just, because especially now today, you can get your stuff up. And if you do a good job and put the time in, time is the one thing that you have if you're a young person. That's the advantage you have. In my mid 30s, I have less and less time. I can promise that. So, just study and practicing and things like that. And then, I did that for a few months, and I think I started in March. And then in August, I got a message from my now boss at the Ringer, and he was asking if I'd want to do a freelance thing with them. And Ringer was my favorite website, so that blew my mind. So then we just kind of developed a working relationship dynamic. And I think, some of that was inevitable because I'd read Grant Land and Bill Simmons my whole life. I used to print out Bill Simmons articles and put them in my book bag and walk around. But yeah, I think that they influenced me. So the fit was kind of set up in advance in a way. So my style was kind of pop culture tie-in and things like that. And it was a good working dynamic, and we went with it, and I've been with them over a year. So it's a great place to work.
You've been doing awesome work there for the Ringer. I'm going to send you out on this. Give me your NBA Finals prediction, and then who's going to win the MVP right now?
I think it's going to be Lakers Nets. I think that my prediction is going to be, the Lakers still, I think, have the two best players on earth when they're functioning. And that's very important. I think defensively, they have a higher ceiling than the Nets. I'll go Lakers. I'll say Lakers in 6. How about that?
Okay.
Yeah.
Who are the MVP of the regular season?
Right now, I'd probably lean towards Embiid, but Jokic has been really incredible. I'm not as much with the LeBron stuff as other people are. I think that's a little more narrative driven, and I'm not really not much of a narrative person when it comes to MVP. So that's kind of where I'm at right now.
I said Lakers Nets before the season. I'm gonna stick with it, but the Nets are gonna be really hard to stop. Now that Sham's reporting that they're going to sign Blake Griffin, that's just more depth for them. If he's gonna come off the bench or start, we don't know, but a lot of scoring there. I think they're one of the most dangerous teams really since the Kiwi Warriors.
I agree. They offensively could hit heights that nobody's hit before. So it's a pretty amazing thing to watch.
Yep. And once again, thank you for Jay Kyle Mann for coming on the podcast, talking all things NBA and the Ringer. Thank you, Jay.
Thanks for having me.
Big thank you to Jay Kyle Mann for coming on the podcast, talking all things NBA, trade deadline, rookies, everything. So huge shout out to the Ringers, Jay Kyle Mann. And coming up next on the Harrison Vapnek podcast, we're going to bring on Mark Medina from USA Today. Going to talk about the injury of LeBron James, what it's been like covering the Golden State Warriors in their dynasty era, and a whole lot more with Mark Medina. So stay tuned for that coming up. And thank you for listening once again. We'll see you next time on the Harrison Vapnek podcast. See ya.